Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Yom Kippur. Thank you for joining us today. This afternoon, we're going to spend some time taking a look at what is going on with adult education as it relates to retention and students meeting their goals. We are well aware of the fact that we lose far too many students before they meet their goals of earning a credential or transitioning on to post-secondary education or careers. So what's going on? And what can we do about it? Now it's time to shift the tide and retain more of our students. With all of the recent changes in adult education standards and assessments, this presents a perfect opportunity for us to merge what we are doing now that is working well with the approaches and strategies that will better prepare students for 21st century challenges and skills. Today, we're going to talk about making that shift. I've invited Jenna Moniz, the chair for the Pre-College Academic Studies at Atlanta Technical College, to facilitate our webinar. But before we get started, I want you to know that your attending microphones are muted. If you have a question or a comment, type it into the Q&A section of your screen. We'll monitor these questions throughout the webinar and make sure we respond to your post. Remember, today's webinar, like all IPDAY webinars, are recorded. Look for them on the IPDAY website. Remember that all webinars can be used for your recertification. Look for them in your portal accounts. Okay, Jenna, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's get started on today's webinar.
Thanks so much, June, and good afternoon, everyone. And again, happy Yom Kippur. We're so delighted to be with you all this Wednesday afternoon. Hard to believe that it is nearing the end of September. We're getting close. Before we know it, we'll be into the fall season, October. I don't know if it is cooling up in any parts of Florida. I just returned last night from Tallahassee, where it happened to be warmer than it is in South Florida. So I think we're still feeling what feels like a lot of the summer. Hopefully everyone's family and friends are doing well with all of the storms out there in the oceans. But again, we're glad that you all have joined us this afternoon. We are happy to be talking about a topic that is very, very timely and important for all of us in adult education. As I shared, I just returned from Tallahassee yesterday, where a task force was called together to talk about retention, student retention, and really investigating and taking a look at what is going on with students leaving our programs in adult education. So as you can see today, our objectives are to talk about retention and also our perspectives of our students and our teaching methodologies as instructors, as well as the way that students may view our approaches. We're going to talk about some student-centered instruction and, of course, 21st century learning for students and the way that we can add on, as June said, to what we're doing now that works and build students into the kinds of learners and persistent learners that will make it successfully into their post-secondary programs and careers. So what the data is showing us right now is that many of our students in adult education programs, and that is from ESOL through ABE, GED even, many of our students are joining us, showing up, paying their tuition, starting programs, and staying in the programs long enough to be a participant. So, that is around 10 hours in the program. So they're participants in our NRS data groups, but not staying and persisting long enough to post-test or even meet their goals. So it's time for us to really take a deeper look at what's going on and why students who have the intent on earning whatever their credential is or furthering their own academic careers, why they start with us and don't continue on and persist through the end. So one of the methodologies to kind of look at what's going on is, to apply what's called a Six Sigma methodology, or really to get to what the root cause is. which also involves asking a series of questions about, that really is as simple as why. Why do we think that our students are enrolling and leaving us? So at this time, I'd actually like to, make this hour that we have together as much conversational as possible, as informal as possible. I want you all to cozy up and pull up a chair and be a part of the conversation, because if we're going to move the needle and if we are going to have impact on student retention and helping students to meet their goals, we're going to have to do this together. So I'd really like to kind of get a feel from you out there as to what your feelings are, what your thoughts are with regards to why we think that students are leaving our programs before they actually meet their goals. So at this point, I'd like for you to feel free to jump into the Q&A bar. Take a couple of seconds just to type in what you think might be happening, what you think might be some of the root cause. Why are students leaving us? I see a couple of answers coming into the Q&A bar now, so feel free to continue to. No answer is a wrong answer, and no one else can see your responses, only I can, so it'd be really nice if I can just get an idea from you out there what you think is happening, because students are showing up, they're getting their foot in the door, they're making a commitment, and then they slip away. So what do you think is happening? So I see some interesting responses. I see pregnancy, I see jobs, finding jobs. Some of them don't have confidence in themselves. More jobs. Family responsibilities. More family responsibilities, employment, frustration. Employment commitments. They feel like their journey will be too long. Skill level is lower than they thought. In addition, life events happen and the students become overwhelmed. They get discouraged due to the length of time needed to make necessary progress. Too many commitments, family, work, getting bored. Personal reasons, family, not having transportation, not seeing the end goal. Lack of hope, no future goals. Some are getting jobs. When students are in our programs, it is because they have a number of other responsibilities that overwhelm them. When our attendance strictness pushes them out, instead of allowing them flexibility. Not accustomed to our teaching methods, discouraged by test results. Could be patience level with length of the commitment. Many of them want education but don't understand the work drive to achieve these goals. They are in over their heads. Some have transportation issues, distracted in the classroom, language barriers. Flashbacks to past failures compound their sense of failure. Great responses. Out-of-school youth do not have a sense of purpose and do not have a sense of urgency. Thank you for those very honest responses. We appreciate them. Feel free to continue to chat. We'll save those responses and we can always continue. We will continue this conversation as we move forward. So stick close to your computer because, again, I want to make today as conversational as possible. So we'll continue to monitor the Q&A chat box, and June will help me out too. If she sees something in there that I'm not seeing, June will jump in and make sure that we also respond. So not too long ago, a school in South Florida participated in this same kind of activity that we just did, where teachers, instructors, staff were asked what we think is happening. What is the root cause of student attrition? Why are our students leaving us? Why do they start the programs and leave before they actually meet their goals? And again, as our data is showing us, not only are they leaving us before they meet their goals, they're leaving us even prior to post-testing. So what's going on? So these were some of the responses that came back from this focus group. And they had to do with one category, and this category is student-related: lack of motivation, lack of drive, confidence, work schedules, learning disabilities, diagnosed and undiagnosed, poor attendance, language barriers. So similar to some of the responses that we just saw in our chat. With regard to curriculum and resources, the TABE at that point not being aligned to the CCR standards, challenging curriculum, lack of tutoring options. And then with regard to policies and procedures, we saw a concern with data reporting issues, testing policies, and then court-ordered requirements. So I think that also spoke to the idea that students are, that there are some students here in our programs because they're court-ordered to be in the programs. So interesting feedback, and I certainly see some correlation with regard to the responses that came through the Q&A chat just now, and the responses that are here that came with, that the focus group contributed. So I'm opening the Q&A box back up because I'm interested also in your thoughts with regard to what do you notice about what our responses entail, or what this focus group mentions or doesn't mention. Do you see anything here with regard to the responses of the focus group and or the responses that came into the chat box today that I read off that might be surprising to you? So I see a few more responses as well. And interesting, the last response here that I see, because there are a number of responses that have to do with students' fear of failing before beginning, numerous reasons, financial reasons, students don't feel a sense of urgency or lack of support. The last response, however, that I see in the chat box is one word, one simple word, and it says bored. So that's an interesting response and an interesting take, and one of the only ones in my observation that have to do with our responsibility as instructors or as staff. In other words, a lot of the responses that are here, the reasons that we're finding here, have to do with issues or reasons that are on the part of the student, on the part of the curriculum, on the part of the policies and procedures, not many that have to do with where we stand, what is in our control, and what our contributions may be as instructors. So there's a lot of data out there, a lot of research that has already been done with regard to what is the most impactful contribution with regard to student achievement. What matters the most? What's most important in terms of student achievement? And a lot of that research points back to teacher efficacy. So teachers believing in their students, believing in themselves, believing in ourselves, that our students can do it, and or that we can do it, that we can jump the hurdles, we can overcome the challenges, that we can move through and persevere through, persist through the challenges that may be out of our control, so that students make gains, so that students reach their goals. And so you see here with this graph that teacher efficacy far outweighs a lot of the other contributors with regard to student achievement. In other words, we're really important. Our teachers, we all are very, very important with regard to student achievement. And I'm sure that you could attest to personal testimonies of students who have come back to you and said, it's only because of you that I persisted. It's only because of you that I made it, or because of you I was able to do these, to reach these goals and to be where I am now. So I know that may not be new news to any of you, but it's always worth reminding ourselves just how powerful we are as instructors as it pertains to student achievement and our students' futures. If you have not read this body of research, I highly, highly encourage you to. It's called Don't Call Them Dropouts, and you can find it at gradnation.org. It's a pretty comprehensive body of research, but lots of good information that we can glean from it. And it's put together by America's Promise Alliance and Tufts University. And this was a couple-year-long research that where students, in thousands of students, in fact, in 25 cities, cities that were suburban cities, rural cities, urban cities, were interviewed, and thousands more were surveyed about what happened, why did you leave school, why did you leave high school before graduating? And we see that stark percentage here that 20% of our young adults, our young people, leave school before graduating. So take a look at some of the students' feedback about why they actually left high schools in the first place. Pretty interesting. And as a lot of your comments alluded to, certainly the reasons that students leave high school before graduating are numerous. They're clustered, in fact. It tends to be issues or problems that are coupled upon each other, and certainly not the same issues geographically or across the board. We certainly couldn't say that we're all pointing to the same issue. But this feedback here is pretty powerful in terms of what students are telling us are the -- reasons why they actually left high school in the first place. I'm going to go back to that last comment that I heard or read in the comment box that just said in one simple, very frank word, bored. If you look at the percentage of students that reported being bored and leaving high school before graduating, it is enough to give us pause and to take a step back and say, well, hang on, maybe the reasons that students are leaving us, in addition to all the hardships that we know that students face, maybe there is something that we could do to take a look at ourselves and how we're showing up and what our instruction looks like to respond to that very sobering number of students who are leaving us and reporting that they're leaving us because the instruction was not meaningful to them.
And the comment there of failing too many classes, there's a Q&A in here saying that often students have not been encouraged or challenged. They have not been told to dream.
Interesting. Very interesting comment. Thank you for that, June. Yeah, I can speak to a district in Florida that was a finalist for the very prestigious Broad Prize for a number of years, 3 years in a row, in fact. And if you are a finalist for the Broad Prize for 3 years in a row, you're doing something right. And from my understanding, one of the top reasons that this district wasn't chosen for the Broad Prize was because the number of students that reported exactly what you just mentioned, that reported not being challenged to dream, to think creatively, to think out of the box. So it certainly information to give us pause and to step back and evaluate what it is that we're doing. And so what this report does is starts by saying, before we do anything else, before we take action, we need to listen to the voices of students. And one of the most important things that we can do is listen to the voices of students who have left high school early, find out what they report could have made the difference for them. Because one of the things that this report also makes very clear is that beyond the numerous reasons that students are leaving high school early, they are coming back. They're coming back to schools, they're coming back to earn their credentials. They know that they have to finish high school and push on through post-secondary and have goals and aims of post-secondary enrollment. So they're coming back, and in many cases, they're coming back to us in adult education. So it behooves us to listen to some of the responses of these students as to what worked, what didn't work, and what we can do differently for them, so that someone mentioned in the chat, so that whether it be that sense of failure or that sense of boredom or that sense of not being pushed to dream is responded to this time around. One of their requests that was pretty clear across the board is that students were asking not to be called dropouts, hence the name of the report, Don't Call Them Dropouts. So, you know, the whole idea and the stigma behind, and again, just that exacerbation of that sense of failure, using the terminology dropout to them was something that they clearly and explicitly asked that we do not do. Here's another thing that comes up quite often. You probably hear it a lot in your institutions if you are a GED institution, if your programs also offer GED preparation. I know a lot of potential students will come to us, and their sense, their feedback, their feeling is, well, yeah, you know, I do want to finish and I do want to move on to college, but I don't really want a GED. And all of the stigma that, you know, they have attached to GED and the GED title. So we are fortunate enough in the state of Florida that this high school diploma after GED preparation is just that. In fact, hopefully we're all aware that GED is, you know, certainly proprietary. GED is the name of the testing service. It's the name of the test. And nationally, there are 3 tests. There is the GED, there is the high set, and there's the task assessment, all of which are high school equivalency diplomas, and depending upon the state, students will earn that high school equivalency diploma. In Florida, we're fortunate enough that students earn the high school diploma upon GED completion. I'm saying this because in so many cases, we are used to the terminology GED. You're going to come in and you're going to earn your GED. And when students see this diploma and see that it's actually called a high school diploma, it's, you know, right there in front of them. In fact, the only place that GED is on this credential is right underneath Tara Goodman's name, because that's her title. But students upon completing and passing the 4 GED tests earn a high school diploma. So in the same way that students are asking that we don't call them dropouts for leaving high school, I think it's a simple thing, and it's maybe a cultural shift, but it means a lot to a lot of our students that, you know, we call it exactly what it is, which is a high school diploma. It's not a GED. It's a simple fix that we can do. So. And again, like I said, I want to allow today to be conversational and to be open and to be informal. And as we have these conversations, and I encourage you all to have these conversations at your own institutions about what's going on, you know, just by asking ourselves why are they leaving us, that we're able to be honest with ourselves and honest with one another. We're in this together. We have a pervasive and consistent issue across the state of Florida, nationally really, but really in the state of Florida, of student attrition, of students leaving us. So we know that we have to band together and work together to find the solutions. So it's really going to be important that we're able to be honest with one another and honest with ourselves with regard to how we show up and what our classrooms look like and what our institutions look like. So with that said, I'd like to play a little honest game called Have You Ever, right? So, well, first of all, do you know what this is? Great. So that's a mini joke I was going to say. If we don't know what this is, then already we've lost the game. This is a remote control. And this is what runs the lives of a lot of our youth now. If they are video games or gamers, and a lot of adults too. This is a remote control, and this is where and how a lot of our young adults spend a lot of their time. But seriously, on a serious note, have you ever? Going to put a couple of questions up on the slide, and this is really not for you to respond to, but just to kind of think about. So have you ever with regard to how I show up. Have you ever said regarding students who didn't graduate and are now with us, well, they should have graduated when they had the chance? So again, just some kind of really honest, probing questions that we'll ask of ourselves. You don't have to respond to these or to anyone else, but, for us to kind of think about and reflect upon. Have you ever said, I teach level M, or I teach level D or A, I teach ABE, I don't know anything about GED, or I teach ESOL, I don't know anything about ABE? Have you ever heard or said, if he or she would just sit down and do the work, then he or she would finish, right? So just kind of some probing questions for us to, reflect upon and ask ourselves. If he or she would just smile more. And those, I would just like to say, are real questions, real responses, real things that I have personally heard in the field. So maybe you have not heard them. And then here's kind of a joke, but not really. Real talk, right? Thanks for that amazing worksheet. So I guess this kind of is along the thread of not have you ever, because certainly, there are times and places, and we all do at times use worksheets, but if worksheets are the core of what we do each and every day in our classes, I would offer that this is an opportunity for us to stop and give pause, and especially with the fact that our new standards are rolling out for ESOL, and the TABE test is forcing or encouraging some shifts upon us, that we take a look at how much paper we use, how many worksheets that we actually hand to students. Then I won't read this slide, but this is a real quote from one of the students in the research. And again, the fact that there are new standards for ESOL, and there's a new TABE test, 11-12, and everything is aligned to the college and career readiness standards, the CCR standards. We're all kind of speaking the same language now. So the days of, oh, I don't know anything about ESOL, or I don't know anything about ABE, and I don't know anything about GED are over, because really now we're all talking the same language. We're all looking at the same goals, the same standards. Which really offers us an opportunity to shift the focus. So by now, for sure, you know where your curriculum standards are. Your standards are your curriculum frameworks on the Department of Education's website. These are your guiding, this is your guide, this is your curriculum, this is where we start. So as we shift from the old standards to the new standards in ESOL, and as we shift from the old TABE to the new TABE, this is where we start. Now, while this will not be an activity of unpacking standards, if you have not participated in activities like that, this is where you absolutely start, because you have to know the standards in order to know where we're going, especially with the shifts in the tests and the frameworks for ESOL. And I know that right now, with all of our materials, publishers will be stamping materials left and right. Oh, our books are now aligned to the CCR standards, and we have materials, and maybe your school is in the predicament or in the place where you can buy new books. I would encourage you to take your time with regard to purchasing more materials, new materials. Publishers will be very fast and quick to produce materials, but we'll also be seeing that most publishers will not be producing materials that are aligned to certain tests. And that, again, is because they're all of these tests, all of these assessments are now aligned to the same standards, ESOL through GED. So most of what you're going to see now are the fact that our materials are aligned to the CCR standards. So back to that idea of, if you are not comfortable with your standards, this is your starting point. And there are plenty of webinars and lessons that are on the IPDAY website that we've done over the last couple of years. These standards, the CCR standards, are not new for ABE. They're only new for ESOL. So we've been working with these new standards for a couple of years now. The fact that the TABE test is changing is the only new thing at the ABE level. But again, if you haven't had the chance and opportunity to really dig into your standards, this would be the time to do so. Because all of these standards point to 21st century learning skills. The 21st century learning skills are embedded within the CCR standards. And when we talk about 21st century learning skills, one way to really think about them is through the 4 C's. And the 4 C's are critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. These are the skills that employers are saying that they need their employees to be well equipped with. When they get to them, when our students graduate from us and become employees, the employers are not going to have the time to ramp them up to become critical thinkers, to become strong communicators, to learn how to collaborate with people, to think creatively and outside of the box and solve problems together. They're not going to have the time to ramp them up. This is their opportunity to do so with us while they are with us, is to build these 21st century learning skills, which are embedded in the standards. And the standards also provide a real opportunity. One of the things that's really different with these standards is that it's not a matter of learning content. Yes, it's content for sure, but these standards really empower students with agency. So they really empower students with doing. So the standards are about more than just learning isolated skills. For example, in math, a student is going to be asked to do much more than learn a formula, plug in numbers and get the right answer on a formula. These standards really allow students to become agents, to use those math skills in application. So while it's critical, yes, that we are teaching students the foundations and teaching them the skills, it's equally important, if not more, that we are teaching students how to use them in the real world, how to apply them. Application is key here. It's a major part of the shift. How are we teaching students to use these skills to do things in the world and to think through problems that we don't even know exist today? So you probably have all seen this chart that shows us what impactful learning looks like. And we see that, the teacher lecturing and the students reading, isolated reading, is impactful only up to a certain point. So the most impactful thing that we can allow our students to do to empower them with is to work together, work through discussion, practice by doing, and teaching each other. You can't teach something if you don't know it, and if you don't know it, you can't teach it. So you also see here that project-based learning, has a lot to do with teaching one another, working together. So some ideas as we move forward, as we push forward toward these new expectations and new need of student, not only does it meet the standards, but we know that it will also help to respond to the need. What students are asking for happens in the classroom. And again, this is another way to look at that same chart and kind of what the teacher responsibility looks like in relation to what we know is effective. Less of us, more of them. Teacher becoming the facilitator of learning, students taking responsibility of learning and working together and collaborating together. I'm going to take a peek at the Q&A panel here because I see some comments coming in. Interesting. In my experience, test assessments don't correlate to students' abilities and needs. Oral testing does not assess the grammar and production that we teach, and students need to achieve higher levels. Oral tests only help funding in early levels for quick advancement mirage. So test assessments don't correlate to students' abilities. Right. So again, we need to make sure that we are teaching students how to apply these skills, not just for the purpose of the test, but how we can apply it in the real world. Now, that's not to say at all, poor baby, right, that we are throwing out everything that we do. We're not saying that at all. There's a lot of what we're doing that works and that is effective. And we are always going to have to teach students the fundamentals. But what we're saying is, in addition to learning the fundamentals, we're always teaching the fundamentals, again, in context of the real world application, and in context of how they can apply that and do something with them in terms of agency. Making learning meaningful, not just where I place the punctuation, for example, where punctuation belongs, but how I can use that punctuation in speaking and in writing for meaningful purposes, for purposes that actually mean something and are important to our students. So growth mindset is a concept that you will, if you haven't heard about, you will likely hear much more about. It, I think, is growing like wildfire, not just in education, but across fields, literally in the sports industry, in lots of different professions. This is something that we just discussed a lot while we were with our focus group, our task force in Tallahassee. Growth mindset. And if you haven't had the chance, please do some research on the concept of growth mindset. It has everything to do with the way that we see ourselves, the way that we see our students, and the way that we see ourselves, the way that we see ourselves in life in terms of that agency. What impact we can have on our lives, on our own lives, on our students' lives. And it's not that we are one or the other. So you see the mention of fixed mindset versus growth mindset, obviously with growth mindset being the goal. It's not that we are one or the other, or we always land on one side or the other, but this is a continuum. And in different times and circumstances, different situations, we could straddle the lines and feel more in a fixed mindset, or feel more in a growth mindset. Growth mindset being having the confidence and efficacy to know that we can make a difference, to know that the actions that we take actually can impact and make a difference. So as this relates to our students, and back to our responses to what's going on and why students are leaving us and why they don't stay, if our immediate and only response alludes just to the barriers, allude just to what students have in their way and the adversity that they face, then perhaps what we can consider is that we're not opening ourselves up to all of the possibilities, that we do have a lot of impact. We do have a lot of empowerment power with regard to our students. Again, if we're remembering that the teacher is, instructors are, we can be that person that changes a student's lives. We have to believe that we can. So again, it's this is a continuum. It's not stagnant, and at any time or place and with different situations, we're going to feel different levels of readiness and ability to grow versus being fixed in a situation. But you kind of see here the difference between what a growth mindset would be and a fixed mindset would be as we are presented with challenges and work and feedback. And whether or not, when we face challenges, how we approach those challenges. So if we have a challenge in front of us, do we immediately say, feel like it is what it is and there's nothing that we can do about it? And I know that's extreme. But if we're faced with a challenge, do we also feel like, okay, it's a challenge, but what can we do? What is in our control that will allow us to jump the hurdles? And that's the gist of it. Super simplification. So please do take some time to do some research into growth mindset. Purchase the book, or just find some of the videos online. But it's very powerful, not only for ourselves, but also to be able to empower our students with. So the concept of being able to impact our students and do something different. QX schools. This is a huge initiative, Rethinking High Schools. A few years ago, the Gates Foundation poured millions of dollars, I think close to $100 million into folks that had ideas on how we could rethink high schools. And I believe it started off as a $50 million grant and turned into a $100 million grant because of all of the responses and all of the excitement around it. But they traveled as they were building up the excitement around offering these grants, and as different agencies were writing for these grant proposals, they traveled around the country in on different buses. And I had the opportunity of visiting them while they were in South Florida. My son and I went down to Miami and visited them as they traveled around the country. We got excited about it, maybe too excited, huh? So this bus is beautiful. You know, folks had the opportunity of getting onto the bus and making recordings. And then you see we had some fun there. But you can see here the states, the places where, and these were the actual schools that were initiated, that were launched based on these grants. And these are schools that decided they were going to start completely from scratch and build schools and programs that look very, very different from what we see in our traditional high schools now. And what's really, really interesting, and I think a thread through all of these schools, is they started with student feedback. What is it that you would like for your schools to look like? And every single one of these schools uses a foundation of project-based learning or problem-based learning, where students are actually working with their teachers, working with their staff, learning their curriculum for sure, learning their standards, learning, completing everything that they would complete at a traditional high school, and also building projects along the way, so real-world projects that students are interested in. So project-based learning and problem-based learning, again, if you haven't, and I'm sure that you've heard about them, if you haven't taken the time to really try some project-based learning, problem-based learning in your classes, I highly, highly encourage you to do so. It does take planning, but the beautiful thing is once you've planned some of these projects, you've got them and you can use them again. The other beautiful thing is that your students are helping you to devise the projects. It incorporates all of your 21st century learning skills, and that students are working together, they're collaborating, they're grappling with issues. Clearly they're reading, so literacy is embedded. All of your skills are embedded, but students are working together to solve real problems that they see happening in their communities, and problems that they see that mean something to them, so not only are they learning the skills, they feel like they're doing something that's impacting their community. So PBL as a definition, I won't read this whole slide to you, but this is learning methods in which students identify real-world problems and come up with the solutions together. Okay, students are using technology, promotes lifelong learning, connects students with schools and the real world, lends itself to formative and authentic assessments. So that kind of responds to the comment that was in the chat box about our assessments. These are really authentic assessments. Okay, students are engaged. They build those college and career skills, those skills that employers are looking for, that they don't have the time to ramp them up with. This builds it in while they are with us and encourages imagination and creativity. And I think we heard that in our chat not too long ago. So back to the research that we shared in the Don't Call Them Dropouts body of work. Again, and I heard this in the chat bar too, the reasons that students leave traditional high school in the first place are clustered for sure. So it's not, in most cases, it wasn't just one reason or one issue. They were, issues stacked upon each other. In a lot of cases, students came from toxic environments. They were yearning for connectedness. And I think this is huge for us because a lot of what this research says is that these students, we're emotional creatures. Humans are emotional creatures. They are yearning for connection and a sense of community. And sometimes that sense of community led them into directions that weren't necessarily positive or healthy for them. But students want a sense of belonging. Young people period, not just young people, we're talking about everybody here, need a sense of belonging and to feel like a part of a community. So in our transient schools where students are in and out, what can we do to help build that sense of connection and community so they feel like they're a part of something? And then finally, the resilience and need of support. We also know that a lot of our students are dealing with, and let's face it, we can't just isolate our students. This is a two-way street, more than a two-way street. This is a relationship that we have, and we have to also step back and look at our own health and where we are and what we're dealing with and what's on our plate, our level of stress, what's going on in our own lives. Because everything that we deal with and carry, we certainly carry into the classroom and will impact the way that we show up. So it's important that we check in with ourselves and make sure that we are in our best place and we are in our best sense of health and taking care of ourselves and our own stress levels. Otherwise, we're just taking it into the classroom, and a lot of that energy becomes transferable and then in a lot of cases bounced back to us. But stress, we know, is something that is perhaps increasingly an issue for young people, for people. We see that epidemic numbers of students or young people are looking to ways of coping with the stress and anxiety that are not healthy. So what can we do to help our students deal with a lot of these stress factors that we know they're walking in the door with? And I'm not just talking about test anxiety, although that is one thing that we see present a lot. It's easy for us to point to test anxiety because that's often when we see it show up. But chances are there's anxiety that is pervasive throughout our students' lives. And are we providing the types of supports that can help students to deal with that? Because if we're not, and our students are functioning in survival mode, it's difficult for us to expect them to excel to the levels of academic success if they're not even taken care of as human beings. So it's going to be important for us to look for those supports. And oftentimes with our staff and the amount of staff that we have in the adult programs, there aren't a lot of people out there to point to. We know that our students oftentimes trust us. They come to us. They share their stories with us. They share their stress with us. They trust us. If you've formed relationships with your students, oftentimes you're going to be the one that they come to. So again, important that you're checking in with yourself, making sure that your own health is that you're taking the time to self-care. But also, how can we find resources for our students so that they can lean on one another, that they can work, so that they have folks, that they feel a sense of community, that they feel like there's someone there for them, because we know that it is the sense of isolation that leads a lot of young people, that leads people to engaging in unhealthy activity. At our school, we have our teachers have taken on the charge of, and I know that a lot of you out there do the same thing, whether it's a formal process or not. Again, your students are coming to you. You become their coaches. You're not just a teacher. You're a coach. You're a psychologist. You're a social worker. You're a family member. You become a lot of things to these students that you form relationships with, that become close to you. At our school, our teachers have taken on the charge of really becoming not just academic leaders for our students, but also success coaches for them. So making sure that, and again, this is, we really empower our students to take the lead. So, we talk to our students and then we tell them, you're in the driver's seat and we are the facilitators and we're the support from the side and the back. You need to know what your roadmap looks like, and we're going to check in with you periodically to make sure that you're on track, to make sure that you're making strides forward, to make sure that you're still here. So if students start to, if their attendance starts to get sketchy, we know that you pick up the phone, but we've built in a process that after 3 days of a student not attending, we pick up the phone and we call the student to see what's going on and make sure that they're okay, encourage them to come back in. But we've built a process that we check in with every single student individually. Now this happens to be a GED checklist to success. And the front of it is your academic side. So these are all of your check marks to have you done what you need to do with regard to all of your progression academically, and then your transition on to post-secondary steps. But there's also a piece that deals with the holistic side. What is going on if there, if everything is not moving smoothly and going well and progressing for you, let's start to peel back the layers of what's going on underneath. So we start to talk about, well, the whys. Again, the why attendance isn't strong. What's going on? Is it a work issue? Is it a finance issue? Is it a transportation issue? Is it health? And as we start getting, responses to these issues, we point students in the direction to get some supports, whether that direction and that, that referral is in-house internally, or if it's an external referral to our support systems, our partnerships outside of our schools. And, we look for ideas, as I mentioned, as we started off, the task force that is, you will hear more about in the months to come. We'll be looking for your ideas. We're going to be looking for what is working out there in the field. We know that you all are doing some wonderful things, and we know that you have some great practices in place. So we're looking for ideas with regard to how can we foster relationships best with students and make them feel connected and part of a community so that we don't lose them. So, I offer to you to type in any responses that you have here, any ideas, any innovative things that you're doing at your schools. And if not today, then you have my email address here. Please do share any ideas that you have seen or heard about or have questions about, or that you're using at your institutions that are working for you, because again, we are going to need to band together in this and help each other to answer this question of why we're losing students, why we're bleeding students really, and what we can do to make sure that once they come to us and they've made the steps, they've made the attempt of getting to us, they're 1 foot in the door, how we can keep them with us so that they meet their goals and they're successful in their lives, because their futures truly are dependent upon it. And I'm going to say I think our future in adult education is also dependent upon it, because if we don't have students, folks, we don't have work. But the workforce is in need of skilled employees, and right now there are far more jobs than there are out there, than there are employees to fill those jobs. So we really do, not just at the schools, but in our communities. So if we're reaching out to our communities, organizations and partnerships in our communities to help answer these questions, it's something that we're going to have to do together, which also means that we're going to have to come out of if you're most comfortable, and I found this to be a thread, if you're most comfortable teaching on your own and in isolation and not collaborating with your peers and working with our peers, because when we talk about 21st century learning, we're also talking about communicating and collaborating. If we're talking about project and problem-based learning, we have to be working together. So again, I encourage you to share any ideas you might have, either here or email me about ideas for retention, how we keep students, how we foster relationships with them and make learning meaningful so that we can keep them and see them through their academic goals. because we really can make a difference. At this time, I am going to open up the Q&A box. So if you do have any questions or responses, we'll keep monitoring that, and I'll turn it over to June at this point, who will close us out. I do thank you for your time. This is my contact information here, as always, so feel free to email or call any ideas, questions, follow-up. And again, I'll turn it over to June.
Jenna, thank you so much. I mean, those tips and strategies that you provided for us are just so key. A few things that I just wanted to bring out. There was some, in the Q&A, we did get a response to, in addition to the growth mindset that you mentioned, there's also this mathematical mindset from Joe Bowlers. So we'll go ahead and provide that link there. And I think that's so important too, because so many times we hear our students saying, you know, I'm just not a math person, you know, I just can't do it. But as you mentioned, those little words and that encouragement to that student, can you imagine if we just put yet to the end of that question? That would be just a little thing that could make such a difference. So I wanted to really thank you so much for all your feedback, and we'd love to hear from all of you. So send your information to info@floridaipday.org. We'd love to hear about your best practices and your ideas. We look forward to that. But before we close out today's webinar, we just want to take one more minute of your time to have you answer 3 short survey questions. They're on your screen right now. So if you would just go ahead and take a minute to respond to those feedback questions, we would appreciate it. I'm going to give you a minute. And as you're finishing up those questions, I wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. And I wanted to let you know that next Wednesday we will not have a webinar. Some of us will be traveling to the ACE conference, but I really would like for you to note October 3rd, we're going to have an update from GED Testing Service, and it's going to be regarding the latest on the testing accommodations for GED testing from GED Testing Service. So I know that's going to be something that you will not want to miss. So again, we wish you a great rest of the day, and thank you very much for everything that you do in our journey through adult education. We'll see you next week, October 3rd. Thank you. Thank you, Jenna.